this story of Viktor Frankl and the story of Joseph, which he talks about a little bit later on in the chapter, they kind of go hand in hand.
Yes. Joseph in the Bible, not
Joseph
just some
from
random
the Bible.
Joseph.
Yes.
Yeah.
Joseph from the Old Testament.
Yes, Joseph from the Old Testament.
And their stories kind of are very similar, and they kind of go hand in hand for this example. But obviously, these two people had you'd call it a rough life, like you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There were things, and I was talking
To put
you.
it mildly,
Yeah.
because poor Frankl
Right.
was in Germany during
Yeah.
Nazi Germany, was in an internment camp. So
Yep.
yeah.
And was in a Nazi camp, and his whole family killed.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Other than
And-
his sister.
Yeah. Other than his
How
sister.
do I remember that detail? I have no idea. But other than his sister, it's the stories that grab
Right,
you, and that's why
right.
he writes these stories in. But
Yeah, to drive these points home, and not knowing if he'd ever make it out of there alive or what would happen. He could die that day or the next day, or and he was in there for I don't know how long, but he was in there for a long time, and obviously finally made it out. And then of course the story of Joseph, being sold into slavery,
Right.
And then
By his
his
brothers.
brothers, yeah, and then working for Potiphar, and then being falsely accused,
Yeah.
and being thrown into prison for 13 years, but then eventually rising to the ranks of second in command
Yeah.
in Egypt.
talk about a psychic
Yeah,
social
yeah.
map when your family's the one that throws you into slavery.
Seriously. And I mean, these people definitely had to, as he talks about, they chose to respond in a positive way.
Yes.
They didn't choose to look at their environment and look at the situation they're in and say, oh, poor me.
Right.
Oh my gosh, like I have it so rough. And I mentioned this to you before the podcast, that I don't know, there's probably never going to be anything in my lifetime that I experienced that is anywhere as terrible as what these two people went through.
Right.
You know what I mean? And maybe some people they may experience things that are that bad, but I probably won't. You know what I mean? And man, if they can choose to look at their situation and think positively about it, and not just pretend that there's nothing bad. And Stephen Covey makes a point of that. He's like, being proactive is not being blind to the negatives, right? You know what I mean? You got to look at the situation for what it is, and that's the difference he makes between positive mental attitude and being proactive. Is that positive mental attitude is just like, hey, let's just be positive,
No matter what the situation is, let's be positive.
But proactive is hey, let's look at the facts. Let's get real for a second. But then let's move beyond that, and let's see how we can choose to respond in a positive way, even though the situation is overtly negative.
Yes.
And we can actually be better for it if we do that.
Yes.
And not dwell on the things that are, as we'll get to, outside of our control.
Yeah.
And focus on the things that are inside our control that we can handle. And the first thing that is inside our control is our mental state and our attitude.
Yes.